RLT, in your work with couples and individuals using RLT, we are working with their relational trauma they've experienced, which is often defined as anything less than nurturing, trauma they've experienced in a relationship with another person. So I'm not talking about trauma that came about because of a war in their area of the world, or medical trauma to their body, or something of that nature, or natural disaster, or a school shooting. I'm talking about the kind of up close and personal trauma that can happen typically between themselves, and they usually say caregiver because not everybody is raised by a biological parent. But that's who I'm talking about, or that's sort of what we're looking at in RLT, because that relational trauma and what people do to survive that and regulate themselves as children is what becomes those adaptive strategies that show up and start to wreak havoc in those romantic relationships in adulthood. In RLT, when we think about the trauma grid, we organize that into 4 different types of traumas or wounds. I'll use the word wound sometimes with clients. Maybe you all have experienced this as well, but sometimes I have clients that go, well, I don't have trauma. Like, my parents weren't perfect, but they were pretty good, and we had all of our basic needs met, and nobody ever hit me or did drugs in front of me or did anything really horrible. So I'll use the word wounds. I'll say, okay, well, maybe there's not anything that you would classify as trauma, but certainly human beings raised by other imperfect human beings get things wrong from time to time, and ways that your parents or your caregivers showed up when they weren't being very loving, they weren't being very nurturing. Those can create wounds that still require us as kids to develop adaptations and coping mechanisms. So try that if you have clients that just can't wrap their head around the idea that maybe they have experienced trauma. And so with the trauma grid, we organize that into 4 types. So those 4 types are false empowerment, disempowerment, intrusion, and abandonment. So let's go into each of these a little bit more. So false empowerment really involves elevating children in some sort of way that is inappropriate, disproportionate to their age and developmental stage. So this is not about, telling your kids, oh, I love you so much, or oh, great job, or oh, that was so wonderful, or oh, you're just the best. It's really more than that. It's where you're taking their self-esteem and maybe even what they're responsible for, and you're elevating that way more than what's appropriate. So what that does is it has them begin to view themselves in relationship to others as having more power, being better than, being more special than, having to be in charge of things that they shouldn't be in charge of, when they're 5, 8, 11 years old. That's false empowerment, giving a child more power than what is appropriate for them at that age or stage of development. It might be messages where you give them more power over even like the household. So, times when you're telling kids like you ruined Christmas, or you ruined dinner, you ruined the vacation, really making them feel disproportionately responsible, which is a type of power, right? If I'm 5 years old and I'm being told I have the power to ruin Christmas, that's sort of a elevated state. Do you know what I mean? So the power that they're given isn't always good power, right? Like never having to follow the rules. it can be kind of this negative. I am being told I have the power to negatively impact people to such a degree, that really isn't appropriate for a kid. And it's also not true, right? As we learn healthy self-esteem and boundaries, nobody is responsible for our internal state but ourselves, right? We're all personally responsible for what happens in our own psychological space. But that's a type of false empowerment. So, false empowerment, elevating kids up. Disempowerment is sort of the opposite of that. I am taking away power that they should be able to have and hold at their age and stage of development. So kids should have some power, right? I should listen to my child when they say, for example, I'm full. That's all the dinner I can eat, right? I'm full. I don't want to eat anymore. I should respect their boundaries around their body, right? If they don't want to hug a certain family member, I should give them the power to say, not a hug. I don't want to hug Uncle so and so, right? But when we force that on kids, when we don't listen to them appropriately say no, we disempower them. We take away power that they should have. This can be done really overtly, like the example I just gave of, yes, go kiss and hug Uncle so and so. If you don't, that's so rude. How could you? That's your uncle. Go hug him. Go say hello, right? It can also be more subtle. So I think about how even in my own family, so I'm the oldest. I have two younger brothers. One of my brothers is 5 years younger than me. So I can really remember when he was little. And I can remember, gosh, countless times where either me, my other brother, or my parents did something for the youngest that really he probably should have been doing for himself, like tying his shoes, taking his dishes to the sink, buttoning his shirt, combing his hair. Like we were doing that probably way longer than he needed that from just like a dexterity sort of place, right? That was a type of disempowerment, when it's like, tie your brother's shoes for him. He can't do it, right? Or tie your brother's shoes. We're in a hurry, even though he's like, 6 or 7 years old and really should be able to tie his shoes at that point. So there's subtle ways that we can disempower people. If there's this message or this sort of like taking over responsibilities for them, taking away opportunities from them to do things for themselves, to think independently, to try stuff. I mean, we've all probably been there. If you've been around kids, you've had that moment where, they want to pour the milk into the cereal or into their cup, and you're trying to help foster a little independence. And yes, they spill it. But that is some healthy empowerment that we want to offer, right? So they can eventually begin to feel confident and capable of doing things on their own. If you're always doing things for them, never letting them do things on their own, that's an example of disempowerment. So taking away autonomy, the ability to set boundaries, to make choices for themselves, or overtly telling them, you can't do that. Those are all examples of wounds and traumas of disempowerment. So the third one, intrusion, that is about crossing boundaries. I'm crossing maybe physical boundaries, psychological boundaries, personal boundaries. I am committing boundary violations on my child in some way, shape, or form. I can do that with my actions and with my words. I have known people as I was growing up who they would, I can remember like in high school, a few friends giving me some things to hold at my house. Nothing terrible, nothing, like really crazy, but like a journal or certain, I'm 44, okay, so certain CDs that their parents didn't want them to have because they had a parent at home that would snoop. that would go into their room when they were at school or not at home and look through all of their stuff and seek out things that they felt they shouldn't have. So they intruded on their privacy, which is a type of physical boundary violation. So there's a lot of ways that we can be intruded upon, have our boundaries crossed by our primary caregivers growing up, that then begin to set the stage for those maladaptive strategies later in life, right? If you always had to hide stuff because your parents would come in and snoop, it may not be shocking that you hide things from your wife, husband, partner later in life because you just have that expectation that people are not going to respect your privacy or they're going to come snooping through your belongings. So intrusion is about boundary violations. Another way of putting that is doing things that should not be done. Doing things that should not be done. The last type of wound or trauma is abandonment. Abandonment is kind of the opposite of what I just said. Not doing things that should be done. So these are not boundary violations. They're really more like forms of neglect. So these are things that a parent or caregiver should be doing or providing for a kiddo because they can't do it for themselves yet, and they're not doing it. Children do not come into the world with boundaries or self-esteem. They rely on their caregivers and the adults around them to sort of supply that and model that until they're able to cultivate that for themselves. So they're wide open systems. So we do want to encourage children and praise them and say kind, loving things to them. And if you grow up in a household where you don't receive that, that's a type of abandonment, right? Someone should have been helping you to kind of cultivate some self-esteem until you could do that on your own. This can obviously be some physical needs. If a caregiver wasn't making sure you had food, water, milk, clothes, basic necessities, medical care. Did someone take you to the doctor? Did someone take you to the dentist? When you were sick, did they come and sort of like cuddle you and check on you and bring you a blanket and, make sure that you were okay? Or did you kind of have to fend for yourself? Another type of abandonment, I would say, is helping children as they grow and mature, helping them to understand what is happening even in their own bodies. I've had clients tell me that, they got their period and they had no idea what was happening to them. They thought they were sick, they thought they were dying, they thought they had cancer because it had never been explained to them. That's a type of abandonment, right? I mean, a trusted adult, a caregiver, really should be explaining as kids grow up what to expect from their own bodies, right? And okay, it might be uncomfortable. You might not know the perfect way to say that or explain that. And it might even bring up some of your own maybe wounds from childhood of when your parents tried to have conversations with you about that. And yet, as the adult, that discomfort is ours to own, ours to work through, because this is important for this kiddo to understand what's happening, right? We don't want normal changes in one's body to become a traumatic event simply because you didn't know what was going on. So abandonment can show up in a lot of different ways. That's why I really like to think of it as anything that should have been done for you as a kid and wasn't. Did someone help you with your homework? And if your caregiver just couldn't, right? They just couldn't do fractions or algebra. Did they help you find someone that could do that for you, right? So that's the other thing. I mean, no parent, no caregiver can be 100% available and do all of the things. I know I certainly can't, but I try to stay really present to the things that I can't do and help bring in resources or support my daughter in another way in getting access to what she needs that I can't do for her. We want to show up for our kids, and sometimes that means we do kind of have to get in there and ask some questions, bring up some uncomfortable topics, but we don't want to be violating their boundaries. We do need to learn to back off at times, but we don't want to completely abdicate all responsibility of what we should be doing for them, right? So it's important that over time, my child learn how to prepare food for themselves. But I'm certainly at 5 years old not going to say, all right, it's up to you. There's the kitchen, right? I'm going to start with teaching them how to pour a bowl of cereal, and then maybe making a simple sandwich, and then maybe putting something in the toaster, like it's gradual.